There are mistakes that powerful people make when they sit behind polished boardroom tables. They confuse silence with submission. They mistake patience for weakness. They look at a quiet person and see someone who will simply accept whatever is handed to them. But silence is not always surrender. Sometimes it is strategy. My name is Genevive, and tonight I want to tell you the story of Adrian Hale, a man who was betrayed by the company he gave everything to, who lost nearly everything in the aftermath, and who spent years rebuilding not just a career, but himself. This is not a clean story about justice. It is a complicated story about what happens when ambition collides with integrity and what it truly costs to win. Adrian Hale was not the kind of person who walked into rooms and demanded attention. At 31, he had spent 5 years at Stratos Global as a senior data analyst, a title that sounded important but carried little weight in a company obsessed with charisma and executive presence. Adrian had neither. What he had was something rarer, an almost frightening ability to see patterns inside chaos. He was not perfect. He could be withdrawn to the point of seeming indifferent. In team meetings, he rarely spoke unless directly asked, which colleagues sometimes mistook for arrogance. His manager once wrote in a performance review that Adrian had exceptional technical output but limited executive presence. Adrian had read those words, closed the folder, and gone back to work. He had believed, perhaps naively, that results would eventually speak louder than personality. For most of his 5 years at Stratos, that belief had kept him going. The idea for Atlas Engine came to Adrian during a sleepless night in the middle of a particularly brutal project, a client crisis involving collapsed supply chain predictions that had cost the company a significant contract. While others blamed external market conditions, Adrian noticed something different inside the data. Not randomness. Pattern. Predictable, traceable, preventable. He spent the next 18 months developing Atlas quietly, mostly in evenings and weekends, driven less by ambition than by genuine intellectual obsession. The system integrated thousands of live data variables, logistics networks, consumer sentiment indices, currency volatility, political instability scores, and synthesized them into rolling forecasts that updated continuously. When he finally tested it against 3 years of historical market data, Atlas predicted every major disruption with startling accuracy. Adrian felt something rare that night. Not pride exactly, more like relief, like he had finally built the thing his mind had been reaching toward for years. He requested a meeting with senior leadership. Leonard Kessler had been chief strategy officer at Stratos for 4 years and had survived multiple leadership changes through a combination of political sharpness and careful self-positioning. He was not unintelligent. In fact, that was precisely what made him dangerous. He understood innovation well enough to recognize when someone else had created something truly valuable, and well enough to know how to redirect that value toward himself. When Adrian presented Atlas in the executive boardroom, Leonard watched carefully. Not the graphs, not the predictions. He watched the faces of the other executives as they leaned forward in their seats. He saw what the system was worth. More importantly, he saw that Adrian had no idea how to protect it. After the meeting, Leonard pulled Adrian aside and told him the system needed refinement before any public announcement. He asked Adrian to expand its capabilities, document its architecture fully, and share everything with the strategy team for executive review. Adrian, who had spent years believing that good work earned trust, agreed without hesitation. 6 weeks later, Stratos held its annual Innovation Summit. Adrian watched from the audience as his system appeared on a 40-foot screen, rebranded, repackaged, and presented by Leonard as the product of the Executive Strategy Division. His name did not appear once. Adrian confronted Leonard the same afternoon. He was not angry in the way people expect. No shouting, no threats. He was quiet and direct, which somehow made Leonard more uncomfortable than anger would have. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you never miss another one. "You didn't credit me," Adrian said. "You're part of the team that built it?" Leonard replied carefully. "I built it alone, you know that." Leonard's expression shifted into something almost sympathetic. Adrian, you built it on company time using company resources. Legally, it belongs to Stratos. That's not personal. That's just how this works. Adrian stared at him for a long moment. Is that what you tell yourself? Leonard said nothing further. 3 weeks later, Adrian was called into HR and informed that his position was being eliminated due to a restructuring initiative. He was walked to the door by a security guard, while colleagues watched through glass partitions, unsure whether to make eye contact. Leonard passed him in the lobby on the way out. He looked almost regretful. You're genuinely talented, he said quietly. I hope you find somewhere that deserves you. Adrian looked at him steadily. I will. He meant it as a statement of fact. It took 3 years before it became one. The year after Stratos was the hardest of Adrian's life, and he would later admit that he had not handled it particularly well. He was angry for longer than he wanted to be. He spent months in bitterness that accomplished nothing except exhausting him. Job applications went unanswered. His professional reputation had been quietly undermined through industry channels he couldn't see or respond to. He moved into a smaller apartment, sold his car, ate badly, slept worse. The turning point came not through inspiration, but through boredom. With nothing else to occupy his mind, he opened the original Atlas documentation one evening and began reviewing it critically for the first time. What he found surprised him. The system was good, but it had a fundamental architectural weakness. Its forecasting model was static. It could analyze historical patterns brilliantly, but it couldn't adapt to genuinely unprecedented events. Stratos had stolen a powerful tool, but they had stolen an incomplete one. Adrian opened a new document and began writing. He called the new system Helios Core. Where Atlas had been analytical, Helios was adaptive. It didn't just process data. It learned from its own errors, updating its predictive models in real time when outcomes diverged from forecasts. It was, in measurable terms, significantly more sophisticated than anything Adrian had built before. He incorporated Helios intelligence with 2 former colleagues who had quietly reached out after his firing, people who had seen enough to know what actually happened. The first year was lean and unglamorous. They worked from Adrian's apartment, chased small contracts, and survived on minimal margins. Then a mid-sized logistics firm agreed to pilot Helios Core. 4 months into the engagement, the system flagged a developing bottleneck in Asian port capacity that no major analyst had publicly identified. The client repositioned their inventory strategy accordingly. When the disruption materialized 6 weeks later, they were the only company in their sector that wasn't scrambling. The phone started ringing. By the time Stratos contacted Helios Intelligence, the larger company was in genuine distress. Atlas had been exposed as increasingly unreliable. Major clients had defected. 2 board members had resigned. Leonard, now acting CEO following a quiet internal coup, made the call himself. The meeting was held in the same boardroom where Adrian had once presented his work to people who had no intention of crediting him for it. He sat in a different chair this time, across the table rather than at the end of it. Leonard looked tired in a way that went beyond sleep. We need Helios to acquire the remaining assets, Leonard said. There are still 400 employees here who deserve some stability. Adrian nodded slowly. I know. Is this about what happened? Leonard asked. Adrian considered the question seriously. Partly, he said. For a long time it was mostly about that. But no, this is about the 400 people you just mentioned. He slid the acquisition terms across the table. $1. Full employee retention guaranteed for 18 months. You step down immediately. Leonard looked at the document for a long time. You could have made this humiliating, he said quietly. I considered it, Adrian replied honestly. It wasn't worth it. Leonard signed. Stratos Global dissolved within a year of the acquisition. Helios Intelligence absorbed its strongest talent and continued growing. Adrian rarely spoke publicly about the history between the 2 companies. When journalists asked, he gave the same answer every time. I learned more from losing that job than I ever would have learned staying. He meant it, not as a polished soundbite, but as something he had genuinely wrestled his way toward over years of difficulty and self-examination. The real lesson was never about revenge. It was about what you choose to carry forward and what you finally decide to put down. Bitterness is heavy. Adrian had carried it long enough to know exactly how much it weighed and exactly what it cost him in the years he spent holding on to it. He put it down, not all at once, slowly, imperfectly, the way real people actually do, and then he got back to work.